Orhan was born around 1281 CE in Saut, a small frontier town in northwestern Anatolia, a place where East met West, and war and survival intertwined. His father, Osman I, was the leader of a small Turkmen principality İznik, under the weakening rule of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. His mother, Malhan Hatun, came from a noble Turkish family, and she instilled in young Orhan a deep sense of discipline and compassion. The world Orhan was born into was unstable and divided. The once great Seljuk Empire was crumbling under the pressure of Mongol invasions, leaving small Turkish clans scattered across Anatolia. To the west, the Byzantine Empire still controlled the ancient cities of Bursa and Nicomedia was fading. But its power was fading. The frontier was a no-man's land filled with raids, alliances, and endless warfare. In this turbulent landscape, Osman's dream, to unite the Turks and establish an Islamic state on Byzantine soil, began to take root. And from his earliest years, Orhan grew up in the midst of that dream. A childhood of the frontier unlike princes raised in palaces, Orhan's youth was spent among tribesmen, warriors, and scholars. He learned the arts of both war and wisdom, horseback riding, archery, swordsmanship, and the recitation of the Quran. He listened to Sufi mystics and poets, who taught that power without justice was meaningless. Every morning, he saw soldiers practicing with their bows while elders discussed the latest raids against Byzantine fortresses. From this environment, Orhan absorbed the spirit of the Ghazi, a warrior of faith. He rode beside his father in his teenage years, joining border raids, and thence against Byzantine villages and forts. By his early 20s, Orhan was already known among his people for his calm nature, sharp strategic mind, and humility, qualities that would one day distinguish him from other Turkish warlords who sought glory only through bloodshed. The rise of Osman and the training of Orhan. During Orhan's youth, Osman Ghazi's tribe, originally a small nomadic group, began transforming into a permanent state. Osman gathered warriors, established alliances with neighboring tribes, and launched daring attacks on Byzantine garrisons. Orhan was at his father's side through these campaigns, serving as a field commander. He learned to use diplomacy as much as the sword, often negotiating truces or alliances with local lords. One of the key lessons Osman taught him was discipline in conquest. Osman's method was not merely to conquer land, but to settle it, protect it, and govern it. Villages taken from the Byzantines were repopulated with Muslim settlers, mosques were built, and justice was enforced. Orhan saw this not as simple war, but as the birth of a civilization. The influence of Sufi scholars. Another profound influence on Orhan's character was Sheikh Edebali, the spiritual guide of his father and one of the most respected scholars of the age. Orhan often visited Edebali's lodge, where he heard stories of faith, patience, and justice. It was said that Osman once dreamt of a great tree growing from his chest and spreading across the world, a dream interpreted by Edebali as a prophecy of the Ottoman Empire. Orhan grew up hearing this dream repeated by his elders, understanding that he was to play a role in its fulfillment. Through Edebali's teachings, Orhan learned that power must always serve faith and justice, not the other way around. This belief would become the moral foundation of his rule. The fall of Kara-Kaysar and the expansion of power. By the early 1300s, Orhan was a seasoned commander. His early achievements included the capture of Kara-Kaysar, a Byzantine fortress that became one of the first permanent Ottoman strongholds. He also took part in campaigns around Yeni and Negil, consolidating Ottoman control over the region. These victories weren't just territorial. They proved that the small Ottoman tribe could stand against the Byzantine Empire, which for centuries had dominated the region. Osman began to rely increasingly on Orhan's judgment. He sent him to oversee new conquests, negotiate with rival beyliks, and organize the army. Under Orhan's supervision, the Ottoman warriors began evolving into a more disciplined military system, with clear leadership, structure, and moral code. The making of a leader. Orhan's rise was not merely military. It was moral and administrative. While his father embodied the warrior spirit, Orhan represented order and governance. He showed compassion toward prisoners and respect for religious scholars. He distributed war spoils fairly and listened to the grievances of his men. Even as a young man, he was known to walk among his soldiers at night, speaking with them not as a ruler, but as a brother in arms. His calm and just demeanor earned him loyalty that could not be bought with gold. The kind of loyalty that one day, one of the most beloved rulers in Ottoman history, the transition of powers 1324 CE. In his final years, Osman fell ill and withdrew from active leadership. By 1384, Ottomans tightened their siege around Bursa. Osman formally passed leadership to Orhan, recognizing his son's ability and wisdom. Before dying, Osman gave Orhan a final piece of advice, one that would echo through generations. "My son, be just. Justice strengthens the state as tyranny destroys it. Never forget the people, for a ruler without his people is a body without a soul." With tears in his eyes, Orhan accepted his father's sword, not as a symbol of conquest, but of responsibility. He vowed to continue his father to build a state founded on faith, justice, and order. In 1324 CE, Orhan Ghazi became the second ruler of the Ottoman dynasty, and history turned its gaze toward him. After the passing of Osman Ghazi, the leadership of the small but rapidly rising Ottoman principality fell to his son, Orhan Ghazi. At that time, the Ottomans controlled a region around Stivit, Yeniyer, and Bialysik, surrounded by much larger powers, the Byzantine Empire to the west and several Turkish emirates to the east. Orhan inherited from his father not a vast empire, but a vision, the dream of uniting the Turkish tribes under one banner and establishing a just Islamic state. The young ruler's first test came in the form of a single city, Bursa, the long siege of Bursa. The city of Bursa was one of the most prosperous Byzantine centers in northwestern Anatolia. It sat at the foot of Mount Aluda, surrounded by strong walls and rich farmland. Bursa's location made it a gateway between Byzantine Bithynia and the Anatolian plains, and it served as a hub for silk and spice trade routes that linked the Aegean Sea to the interior of Asia Minor. Osman Ghazi had begun the siege of Bursa in his final years, but it was Orhan who completed what his father had started. The siege lasted nearly 9 years, involving a series of blockades, raids, and negotiations. The Ottomans cut off the city's supply lines, surrounding it from all directions. Orhan's strategy was patient and methodical. He avoided direct assault to minimize bloodshed and instead relied on attrition. His forces built small forts and watchtowers around the city, slowly tightening their control. By 1326 CE, the defenders of Bursa, exhausted and starving, realized further resistance was impossible. The city's Byzantine governor, Evrenos, negotiated terms of surrender. Orhan agreed to spare the inhabitants and to keep their property in exchange for loyalty and tax. When the gates finally opened, Orhan entered Bursa without massacre or destruction, a rare event in medieval warfare. Instead of taking revenge, he prayed in gratitude and declared the city the new Ottoman capital. The transformation of Bursa. With the capture of Bursa, the Ottoman principality took its first step toward empire. Orhan immediately began transforming the city into the political, cultural, and spiritual center of his state. The first Ottoman capital, Bursa, became the administrative heart of the Ottomans. Government offices were established, and a permanent court was formed. The city's economy revived quickly due to Orhan's protection and investment. Construction and architecture ordered the building of public structures that would symbolize stability and piety. The Orhan Mosque, Ulu Kamiai Orhan, the first royal mosque of the dynasty. A madrasa Islamic school beside the mosque where scholars taught theology, law, and Arabic. A public bath, hammam, and marketplaces, ensuring comfort and commerce for citizens. These buildings the beginning of Ottoman architectural tradition. Elegant, practical and spiritual. Justice and tolerance. Orhan Ghazi's governance reflected his father's advice. To rule with justice, Adolf. The Christian and Jewish populations of Bursa were treated with fairness. Their churches and synagogues were left untouched, and they were allowed to continue trade freely. This policy of inclusion and tolerance earned the Ottomans local respect and helped them integrate diverse communities into their empire. Economic strength. To establish financial independence, Orhan introduced the first Ottoman coin, known as the silver aki. The aki bore his name, a declaration that the Ottomans were now a sovereign power. This stable currency encouraged trade between Bursa, İznik, and the ports of the Marmara Sea, making the region hub of prosperity. Bursa. The symbol of a new era under Orhan's rule. Bursa blossomed not only as a political capital but as a symbol of Ottoman civilization. It attracted artisans, traders, scholars, and clerics from across Anatolia. Mosques and markets thrived side by side, and caravans from Persia, Syria, and the Balkans began to pass through Ottoman lands in safety. In the heart of the city, Orhan built his palace near Mount Aludat. Modest compared to the great Byzantine courts, but admired for its simplicity and discipline. He often held open councils where citizens could present grievances directly to him. A tradition of accountability that would continue under later sultans. The capture of Bursa also changed the psychology of the Ottoman people. They no longer saw themselves as a small frontier tribe fighting for survival. They now saw themselves as heirs to a greater destiny, chosen to bring order, faith, and justice to a divided world. The ideological shift with Bursa as his capital. Orhan began shaping a new Ottoman identity. Neither purely Turkish nor Arab, but a blend of Islamic faith, Turkish valor, and Byzantine administrative heritage. He adopted the title, Sultan, alongside Bey, signaling the transition from tribal chieftain to sovereign ruler. The Ottomans began to use Islamic law, Sharia alongside local customs to govern. Arabic and Persian became the languages of scholarship, while Turkish remained the language of the people. This fusion of cultures laid the intellectual and spiritual foundation for the empire that his descendants, Murad Bayezid, Mehmed the Conqueror, would later build upon. Legacy of the Bursa conquest. The conquest of Bursa was not just a military victory, it was the birth of the Ottoman Empire's soul. It established the first capital of the Ottomans, the first Ottoman coinage and administration, the first model of coexistence between Muslims and non-Muslims, the first architectural and educational institutions that reflected Islamic Ottoman identity. Orhan Ghazi's wisdom at Bursa transformed his people from wandering warriors into state builders. Every future Ottoman sultan, from Mehmed the Conqueror to Suleiman the Magnificent, would follow the path he paved. Thus, the conquest of Bursa 1326 CE stands as the cornerstone of Ottoman history. The moment a frontier principality became a nation, and a son fulfilled his father's dream by giving birth to an empire. After the glorious conquest of Bursa, Orhan Ghazi's ambitions turned from battlefields to state building. He knew that to sustain his father's legacy and protect the newly won territories, the Ottomans needed more than courage. They needed order, law, and discipline. Thus began one of the most transformative chapters in Ottoman history. The creation of a structured government and a permanent military. From tribal rule to organized state, before Orhan's time, the Ottomans were a Ghazi principality, a collection of Turkish tribes united mainly by religion and loyalty to Osman's banner. Leadership was based on personal bonds rather than institutions. Orhan realized that such a system could not govern cities like Bursa, İznik, and Nicomedia, prosperous urban centers with diverse populations of Muslims, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews. He therefore established a central administration in Bursa, marking the first step from tribal rule to statehood. The Council of State Divan Orhan organized a divan, a council of trusted advisors and officials to assist in governance. The council consisted of viziers, who managed state affairs and finances, Khadiji, who oversaw justice according to Sharia law, Subaks, military commander responsible for city defense and law enforcement, Defterdar, treasurer who managed tax collection and land records. This system became the prototype of the great Ottoman bureaucracy that would rule millions in later centuries. 2. Legal and religious institutions. To ensure justice and unity among his subjects, Orhan strengthened both Islamic and civil institutions. Establishment of Qadis, each newly conquered city. Judge appointed to oversee disputes and ensure that Islamic law was upheld fairly. The Qadis also acted as administrators, keeping the peace between Muslim and Christian citizens. A delicate task that Orhan handled with remarkable tolerance. Founding of madrasas and waqfs. Orhan was deeply aware that knowledge is the foundation of civilization. In 1331 CE, after capturing İznik, Nicaea, once a major Byzantine religious center, he converted parts of it into centers of Islamic scholarship. He established the İznik Madrasa, the first Ottoman university, and appointed the scholar Davud al-Kayseri as its head. This madrasa produced jurists, theologians, and administrator states who would serve the state. He also set up waqfs, charitable endowments, to fund mosques, schools, and hospitals. These ensured that education, healthcare, and religious services were free to the people. A key feature of Ottoman society for century 3. The birth of a standing army. Perhaps Orhan's most revolutionary reform was in the military, the heart of Ottoman power. Before him, the Ottoman army was composed of Gatsis and tribal warriors, who fought for faith and loot. They were brave but undisciplined and would often disband after campaigns. Orhan saw the need for a regular, salaried army, loyal to the state rather than to individual leaders. Thus, he created 2 foundational forces, the Yaya and Memyu Selim troops. Yaya infantry, paid soldiers who served year-round and were trained in formation fighting. Selim cavalry, mounted troops who received land grants. Tamars in exchange for military service. These troops were disciplined and well organized, the beginning of the professional Ottoman army. This idea of salaried service would later evolve into the Janissary Corps, Yenisary, under his successors. The Tamar system. Orhan introduced the Tamar system, a brilliant administrative and military innovation. Under this system, land revenues, tax from villages, were given to soldiers and officials instead of direct pay. In return, they were required to maintain weapons, horses, and soldiers for wartime service. This system ensured the army was always ready, the government enough to maintain large cash reserves, loyalty of local nobles and commanders to the Sultan. It was both economic policy and military strategy, a cornerstone of Ottoman longevity. 4. The expansion into Byzantine lands. While reforming his administration, Orhan continued his father's mission of territorial expansion, but now with better organization and planning. After securing Bursa, he launched campaigns against remaining Byzantine strongholds. Nicaea. The İznik fell in 1331 CE after a careful siege. Once the seat of the Christian Council of Nicaea, it became a shining symbol of Islamic under Ottoman rule. Nicomedia İzmit followed in 1337 CE, giving the Ottomans full control over northwestern Anatolia and the Sea of Marmara. With these conquests, Byzantine power in Asia Minor effectively ended. The Ottomans now controlled key trade routes between Europe and Asia, opening the path for future expansion into the Balkans. A vision of justice and faith, Orhan Ghazi governed not merely as a conqueror but as a servant of God Abdullah. He was known for his humility, often riding beside ordinary soldiers and eating simple meals. He would say, "Our power comes not from gold or swords, but from justice." Under his leadership, the Muslim population prospered through trade and security. Non-Muslims lived under al-dhimma protection, paying a small tax jizya, but enjoying full rights of worship and property. Scholars and poets found patronage in Bursa and İznik, turning them into centers of learning. The legacy of the reforms between 1331 and 1337 CE, Orhan Ghazi laid the pillars of what would become one of history's most organized empires. His reforms created institution, contribution, divans, council, centralized decision-making and justice, madrasas, schools, spreen, economy with military service, standing army, Yayat and Mimu Selim, discipline and constant readiness, coinage, a stable currency, and these innovations transformed the Ottomans from frontier warriors into a structured state, guided law, faith and discipline, a model of governance that endured for more than 600 years. By 1337 CE, Orhan Ghazi stood as a ruler unlike any of his contemporaries. He had forged not just a territory, but an institutional empire, ready to expand beyond Anatolia. His next challenge would come from across the Sea of Marmara, the beginning of Ottoman Europe. By the mid-14th century, the Ottoman state had grown from a frontier principality into a disciplined regional power. Under Orhan Ghazi's wise rule, the once tribal warriors of Side had become organized soldiers, and Bursa had risen as a proud capital of culture, faith, and administration. Yet Orhan was not content with the peace of Anatolia alone. Across the Sea of Marmara, the Byzantine Empire, once the mighty heir of Rome, was now weakened by internal strife and civil war. Its cities were fractured, its soldiers unpaid, and its people divided by rival emperors. In this chaos, Orhan saw not just opportunity, but destiny. The winds of fate were shifting, and for the first time in history, the Ottomans were about to set foot in Europe. The Byzantine Civil War, an invitation across the sea. In the early 1350s, the Byzantine throne was contested between two emperors, John the Cantacuzene, who ruled from Constantinople but faced rebellion from within, and John V. Palaiologos, a younger claimant backed by rival nobles. Cantacuzene, desperate for military support, sought allies among the rising Turkish beyliks. He knew the Ottomans were disciplined, loyal, and swift in battle. Exactly what he needed to save his crumbling empire. Thus he reached out to Orhan Ghazi, offering not only an alliance but something far more personal, the hand of his daughter, Theodora Cantacuzene, in marriage. This union in 1346 CE sealed a remarkable alliance between the Byzantine emperor and the Ottoman Sultan, a Muslim ruler now bound by family to the Christian empire he once fought. Orhan, ever the strategist, recognized the value of this bond. The alliance gave him legitimacy in European eyes and, most importantly, access to the Dardanelles, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe. The crossing of the Dardanelles in 1352 CE, the civil war reached its peak. Emperor Cantacuzene called upon his offer aid. Orhan sent his brave and talented son Suleiman Pasha, at the head of several thousand troops. They crossed the Dardanelles Strait, the first organized Ottoman crossing into Europe. Their destination, the fortress of Zempi, near Gallipoli, on the Thracian Peninsula. The Ottomans aided the emperor's cause with remarkable efficiency. Their discipline and unity shocked both allies and enemies alike. As a reward, the grateful Byzantine emperor granted them the fortress of Zempi in 1352 CE. A seemingly small gift, but one that would alter the course of world history. For the first time ever, the Ottomans possessed land in Europe. The earthquake and the seizure of Gallipoli. Then fate intervened. A massive earthquake struck the Gallipoli Peninsula. Byzantine fortresses crumbled, their walls split open, and the terrified inhabitants fled. Seizing the moment, Suleiman Pasha led his forces from Zempi to occupy the deserted strongholds of Gallipoli, Bolair, and Tikirda. Within weeks, the Ottoman banner, the white flag of the Gazis, flew over the European shore. When the Byzantine emperor protested, Orhan calmly replied that the land had been abandoned by God's decree, and was now rightfully settled by his people. This was not just conquest, it was colonization. Turkish families, farmers, and craftsmen were brought across from Anatolia to settle in Gallipoli, turning it from a fortress into a thriving frontier town. The crossing of Gallipoli marked the beginning of Ottoman Europe, known as Rumelia. 4. A new frontier. The Ottoman presence in Europe, with Gallipoli secured, Orhan ordered the construction of markets and barracks. The region became a bridgehead for future campaigns into Thrace, Bulgaria, and the Balkans. Suleiman Pasha became known as the conqueror of Rumelia, admired for his bravery and leadership. He established Ottoman garrison throughout Thrace, ensuring the permanence of their European foothold. This move alarmed both Christian and Muslim neighbors. The Byzantine Empire realized too late that the allies it had invited for help had now become permanent residents of Europe. Meanwhile, the Turkish principalities in Anatolia began to view Orhan's growing power with both awe and envy. No other ruler of their time possessed such unity, discipline, and divine momentum. Diplomacy, faith, and the vision of empire. Orhan Ghazi's expansion into Europe was as much a product of strategy as of faith. He did not wage a reckless holy war. Instead, he used alliances, timing, and patience. A mix of diplomacy and destiny. His marriage to Theodora had not only secured peace with Byzantium, but opened the door to Europe without a major war. His son Suleiman's actions, while bold, were also calculated. They gave the Ottomans a permanent bridge between Asia and Europe that could never again be closed. The settlement of Gallipoli changed Ottoman history forever. From this foothold, future sultans, Murad I, Bayezid I, and Mehmed, would march deeper into Europe, capturing Adrianople, Sofia, Belgrade, and eventually Constantinople itself in 1453. All of it began with Orhan's wisdom and his son's courage. The tragedy of Suleiman Pasha in 1357 CE, a tragedy struck that would deeply wound Orhan Ghazi's heart. While traveling near the Dardanelles, Suleiman Pasha fell from his horse and died instantly. He was only in his 30s, a brilliant commander whose bravery had opened the gates of Europe. His body was buried near Bolair, overlooking the sea he had once crossed. His tomb became a shrine, visited by soldiers for centuries, a reminder of the moment when the Ottomans first touched the lands of Europe. Orhan, grieving his son, withdrew from active campaigning. The following years of his life were spent in prayer, reflection, and the administration of his vast, growing domains. 7. The dawn of a new era. By 1354 CE, when the Ottomans had fully secured Gallipoli, their transformation was complete. They were no longer a frontier tribe. They were now an intercontinental power, ruling lands in both Asia and Europe. The conquest of Gallipoli marked the birth of the Ottoman Empire's global destiny, a state destined to become the bridge between East and West, between Islam and Christendom, between tradition and empire. Orhan Ghazi's expansion into Europe was not merely a military victory. It was the moment when the Ottomans stepped onto the stage of world history, where they would remain for the next 600 years. Legacy of Part 4. Element. Impact. Alliance with Byzantium gave Ottomans legitimacy and access to Europe. Marriage with Theodora C. Endrisler 2052. First Ottoman territory in Europe. Gallipoli earthquake. A thunder between 54 allowed permanent Ottoman settlement of Rumelia began. The transformation from regional state to Ottoman Empire. Death of the first Third of the first European, but inspired generations of conquerors. The conquest of Gallipoli and the crossing into Europe symbolized the fulfillment of Orhan's vision, to build a state guided not only by power but by faith, discipline, and divine destiny. The Ottomans had now crossed into the heart of a continent, and nothing would ever be the same again. By the early 1360s, the name Orhan Ghazi had become known far beyond the valleys of Anatolia. From the Black Sea to the Aegean, from the plains of Bithynia to the hills of Thrace, people spoke of the humble Turkish ruler who had turned a small frontier principality into a state of order, justice, and faith. Yet for all his victories, Orhan remained modest. a ruler who preferred a simple tent to a golden palace, a man who ruled more with his heart than with his sword. The later years, a ruler turned sage after the tragic death of his beloved son Suleiman Pasha in 1357 CE, Orhan's spirit began to change. He had spent decades in Tanzan governance. Now he turned inward, devoting himself to faith, reflection, and legacy. He rarely appeared in public ceremonies, instead spending his days in prayer and discussion with scholars, Sufis, and jurists. Visitors described him as a man of gentle voice, white beard, and calm eyes, wearing plain robes and a wool cap, indistinguishable from an ordinary dervish. He would often say to his courtiers, "A ruler's strength lies not in his army, but in his justice. The sword wins the land, but justice wins the hearts." While his generals led campaigns, Orhan focused on ensuring peace and prosperity for his people. Under his guidance, markets thrived, laws stabilized, and faith deepened. The principles of his rule, Orhan Ghazi's reign, was defined not only by expansion but by moral governance. The idea that a just ruler is the shadow of God on earth. He lived by three sacred principles. Adl, justice. He ensured equality between Muslim and non-Muslim subjects. Christians in Bursa and İznik continued to trade and live freely. Their churches were respected, their rights protected. Even Byzantine refugees often found safer life under Ottoman law than under their own lords. Khidmat, service. Orhan viewed kinship as service to the people. He personally supervised land distributions, ensured the fair collection of taxes, and forbade unnecessary wars. When disputes arose, he often sat as a mediator rather than a distant sovereign. A man faith deeply spiritual, Orhan saw the Ottoman mission as a divine trust, not conquest for greed but for the spread of peace in Islam. He funded mosques, madrasas, and charitable foundations, waqfs, to ensure every generation could learn, worship, and prosper. He believed faith should be spread through example, not coercion, a philosophy that made the Ottomans unique among their contemporaries. 3. The blossoming of Bursa. His living legacy under Orhan's careful governance. Bursa flourished into a model Ottoman city, a blend of Turkish simplicity and Byzantine elegance, Islamic scholarship and commercial vitality. He sponsored public works not for grandeur but for welfare, caravanserais for travelers and merchants, hospitals, dar ifat for the sick, soup kitchens, imarets for the poor, mosques and madrasas for spiritual nourishment. His wife Nilfar Hatun, a woman of noble Byzantine origin, also played a vital role in these efforts. She founded the Nilfar Hatun Emirate in İznik, one of the earliest examples of Ottoman civic architecture, graceful, balanced, and open to all. Through these works, Orhan established the Ottoman model of governance, where religion, education, and welfare were intertwined under divine duty. 4. The peaceful transfer of power. By 1360 CE, Orhan had grown frail and weary. The burden of rule, the pain of losing his spent in war and reform had taken their toll. Before his health declined, he appointed his surviving son Murad, later known as Murad I, as his successor. Murad had proven himself a wise commander and pious man, and Orhan saw in him the continuation of his vision. He advised his son with words that would echo through generations. Be the guardian of your people, not their master. Do not let pride guide you, for pride blinds kings and destroys nations. This peaceful and orderly transition of power marked yet another hallmark of Orhan's greatness. The Ottomans would not descend into civil war, but rise united under divine purpose. The death of Orhan Ghazi 1362 CE. In 1362 CE, after nearly 40 years of leadership, Orhan Ghazi passed away in Bursa, surrounded by his family, soldiers, and scholars. He was buried beside his father Osman Ghazi in the Osman Ghazi tomb complex overlooking the city he had transformed. His funeral was simple as he had wished. No gold, no crown, only prayers and tears from those who had lived under his mercy. It is said that even Byzantine captives mourned his death, for he had ruled with compassion unknown among conquerors. His tomb in Bursa remains a site of reverence, a symbol of the moment when faith, courage, and justice gave birth to an empire. 6. Orhan's eternal legacy. Orhan Ghazi's reign 34–2062 stands as one of the most foundational periods in Ottoman history. He did not merely expand borders. He built institutions, values, and systems that would endure for centuries. Legacy contribution. Statecraft transformed a tribal principality into a centralized government. Military founded the first standing army, Yahya and Selim, in the Timur system. Economy introduced the silver, the first Ottoman currency. Religion education built mosques, madrasas, and waqfs to spread Islamic learning. Diplomacy used alliances and marriages, e.g. with Byzantium, to expand peacefully. Cultural integration united Turks, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews under a fair and tolerant rule. His reign created the blueprint for the Ottoman Empire, a realm that would later stretch from the gates of the deserts of Arabia. 7. The man behind the empire. Beyond titles and victories, Orhan Ghazi was above all a believer. A man who balanced the sword with mercy, faith with intellect, and conquest with compassion. He was neither arrogant nor cruel. He saw his power as a trust from God and his rule as an act of worship. He lived humbly, died peacefully, and left behind a legacy greater than gold or glory, the legacy of justice and unity. At 8. Conclusion. The dawn of Ottoman Empire. When Orhan Ghazi closed his eyes in 1362, the sun rose over an empire still in its infancy, but already destined for greatness. His son Murad I would soon take the throne, conquer Sindarn, and establish it as the new European capital. And within a century, his grandson Mehmed the Conqueror would fulfill the family's divine destiny by taking Constantinople itself. But all of it, the glory, the empire, the legend, began with Orhan, the son of Osman, the builder of Bursa, the first to cross into Europe, and the ruler who turned faith into empire. Final words. He came from the dust of Stet, but his faith lifted him to the throne of history. He conquered not through fire and blood, but through justice, wisdom, and patience. Such was Orhan Ghazi, the quiet architect of an eternal empire.